Daf is Daf Nun Vav 56, and we are at the two dots, the last two lines on Nun Hey Amud Bet, Tanu Rabbanan. Right. So remember, our Mishnah talked about the reason we're discussing this is that the Mishnah talked about using money of Maaser Sheni, which you're supposed to take to Yerushalayim and use for. Well, money doesn't grow from the ground, right? So you can't really have money that's Maaser Sheni. You have produce that's Maaser Sheni, but you can take that produce and exchange it for money, or as Charlie pointed out, for kesef, for silver. And you could bring that silver up to Jerusalem and buy food there. Now, of course, it was very common to use that money to buy karbanot, right? To buy a shlamim, you'd go up for the aliyah the regel, you'd buy an animal, you'd bring it on the mizbeach, you'd take all the meat home, not home, in Yerushalayim, and you would eat it. So that the question we had in our Mishnah was, what if you marry a woman with that money? So Rabbi Meir said, it doesn't matter. It's not your money. You can't marry her. You're just giving her something that doesn't belong to you. And Rabbi Yehuda said, it depends. If you did it by mistake, she's not married because she doesn't want to be involved with this money. But if you did it on purpose, she would be married, because even though, then we're going to see why. But let's start with that. Rabbi Yehuda said, if you do it on purpose, she's married. So says the Gemara today, Tanu Rabbanan. Says the following braita: Ein lochin behema b'maot maaser sheni. You can't buy an animal with money that is maaser sheni. Now, of course, that makes very little sense, because I just told you that's a very common thing to buy with maaser sheni. So Rashi explains that this means you can't buy an animal outside of Yerushalayim, right? You can't buy an animal in Vienna where you live and then travel with it. And the reason for that Rashi gives two reasons. One is, he says, because you're supposed to only convert it to kesef, tzartah kesef. Tosfos is very, very bothered with that reason from other Gemaras and Bava Kama and elsewhere. And Tosfos likes the second reason of Rashi a little bit, which is that that's sort of a takana, that we're afraid that the animal is going to become weaker on the derech, right? So that you buy a nice plump lamb in Vienna, by the time you make it to Jerusalem, it's not going to be such a strong animal. So put the money in your pocket and buy the animal when you get there. Okay, that's how he understands Rashi. He quotes the Tosfos actually as a whole different explanation, which is why there's so much Tosfos in the next 2 pages, because he disagrees fundamentally with the reason, and therefore the whole Gemara changes. But Tosfos, says that he thinks the reason you can't buy animals is that we're afraid that animals will have babies. And babies are problematic, because then the babies are kodesh, you don't know what to do with them, and they can get out of control. So you can't buy animals because Shema Yigdal Adarim. They might become pregnant and have flocks. So either way, the Braita says you can't buy animals. Okay? Continues the Braita on the top of Nun Vav Amud Aleph, top line. V'im lakach. Now let's say you do it, right? Let's say you do it. Okay? So then bishogeg, if you do it by mistake, meaning you go and buy an animal and you realize after the fact, oh my gosh, I gave the storekeeper $100 of money of Maaser Sheni. Then yachzeru damim limkomam. Then you go back to the guy and you say, it was a big mistake. I gave you money that was not mine. I was not authorized to do that sale. I need my money back. Here's your animal. Okay. And if you did it b'mezid, meaning you said, I know that this is money. You said to the storekeeper, I know this is money of Maaser Sheni, and I don't care, or whatever you say. I'm giving it to you anyways. So then ta'alev v'tocha b'makom. Then the person who bought the animal has to bring that animal up to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim, as you would expect. So it works if it's done b'mezid. B'shogeg, it doesn't work. And Rabbi Yehuda said, now that's the first part of the Braita. The second part of the Braita, the second line now, Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'medvar memurim. When is that true? That if you buy the animal b'mezid, that you have to take the animal up to Yerushalayim, b'mitkavein v'lakach tchila l'shem shlamim. You went and you bought the animal for the purpose of bringing a carbon. Because if you bought the animal for the purpose of bringing a carbon shlamim, then it's okay. Oh, wow. Then, if you bought the animal for the purpose of a shlamim, then the money goes from the Maaser Sheni into the animal. Aval, says Rabbi Yehuda, mitkavein lahotzi maot Maaser Sheni l'chulin. If let's say you're just a bad guy and you wanted to actually spend the maot Maaser Sheni l'chulin, meaning you thought, I don't care about Maaser Sheni. I'm just spending the money, and I'm going to buy an animal that I'm going to eat here in Vienna tomorrow. Sorry, I'm using Vienna today, but that's the Chutz La'aretz place. And you say, I'm just going to eat it here tomorrow, then bein shogeg, bein mezid, yachzru damim limkomam. And whether you did it, shogeg doesn't matter, but the mazid, even if you did it b'mazid, the money goes back. Meaning, if you tried to take maaser sheni money and use it for something that's not appropriate, then nothing happens. Okay, so that's the end of the Braita. Now, ask the Gemara, how could that be? If you look at our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that if you take maaser sheni money and you use it to marry a woman, she's married, right? That's an inappropriate use of maaser sheni money, right? Because you can't buy a wife with maaser sheni money, right? So that's clearly inappropriate. So ask Gemara V'Anantznan, we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'mezid kiddush. If you marry a woman on purpose, she's married. So why is that any different than buying an animal with the intention of eating it outside of Yerushalayim, which is inappropriate use of maaser sheni money? Why doesn't the thing actually become kodesh? So says Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Elazar, there's a big difference between marrying a woman with money of maaser sheni and buying a chicken or buying a cow, right? Because Isha yodat shein ma'ot maaser sheni mitchalin al yada. A woman knows that I don't become maaser sheni, right? She understands that there's no exchange of money for her in terms of maaser sheni, for sure, right? And she understands that giving her the ma'ot maaser sheni doesn't change their status. There's still money of maaser sheni. She's going to have to take it to Jerusalem on her next trip and buy food there. So if you gave her $100, it might not be worth $100 because she can't spend it for 6 months, but it's worth $50, right? And so she accepts, as long as it's mason, she knows what it is, she accepts and gets married, right? Va'ola va'ochalto b'Yerushalayim. She takes it to Jerusalem and she uses it there. So when you buy from a storekeeper, the storekeeper doesn't realize what's going on. And they think, oh, the money of maaser sheni is being exchanged for the lamb. And the money is no longer special. So I can use it wherever I want, but they're wrong because it is not exchanged for the lamb because you have no intention to bring that lamb to Yerushalayim. And therefore it's going to lead to a big mistake. And therefore we cancel the whole story. Says Gemara, that's a great explanation, but it doesn't hold water. Because matkif la Rabbi Yirmiyah, what about all kinds of other inappropriate things you can do with ma'ot maaser sheni? For example, buying a house, right? Or an eved, or a behemat me'ah. All of those things are things you can't use maaser sheni for because you can't buy karka for sure. But what if you do? So continues the Mishnah, asking him, Harei behemat me'ah, or avadim karkaot. Adam yodeh she'em ma'ot maaser sheni b'chalin aleim. Everybody knows, if you were born yesterday, that you can't take your ma'ot maaser sheni and buy a house, right? It has to be brought to Yerushalayim. And still, what does the Mishnah say? If it's not, we have a Mishnah in Maaser Sheni, Charlie's favorite Masechta, in Masechet Maaser Sheni, one of them. Ein lokchin behimat meya avadim mekarkaot ma'ot maaser sheni. You cannot use money of maaser sheni to buy a behimat meya, right? A non-kosher animal. That's what behimat meya means. And avadim, you can't buy a slave, which is considered to be, karka. You can't buy karka. You can't buy fields, even in Yerushalayim, right? The imlakach, now continues the Mishnah, this is the key thing, that if let's say you take your $10,000 in ma'ot maaser sheni and you go to the guy and say, I want to buy your house, right? So what happens, says the Mishnah, yochal kinegdan. You've got to go get another $10,000 and say, the ma'ot maaser sheni that I gave to the homeowner should be chal on this $10,000 and use that in Yerushalayim. Basically, it was no deal, right? The money remains kodesh. So what about in that case? Why don't you say everybody understands you can't exchange it? Why is it like marrying a woman, right? Where if you give the money, the person understands it's ma'ot maaser sheni, right? And it seems like it should be the same exact thing. Says the Gemara, well, there's a big difference. It must be that people really are not so smart. And people don't realize, this is one explanation, that when you give money of maaser sheni for a house, that it's not suitable. But our Mishnah is talking about Isha Chavera, a woman who's a Chaver, right? She's a wise, a Chaver usually means a learned person. Askinan diyada. She knows that Maaser Sheni is not going to be mitchalel. But regular storekeepers, even if you buy a house from them, they don't realize that. And so they think, or you think maybe, that the money that you're giving that person is exchanged for the house. And now the house is Maaser Sheni. Of course, how could a house be Maaser Sheni? Some people don't think that clearly, first of all. But second of all, you might think that the house is Maaser Sheni, meaning that when I sell the house in 10 years, that money is Maaser Sheni money, right? So basically the house is the value or the field or the cow or whatever it is for Maser Sheni. Now, it's not true, just to be clear, but people we're not so knowledgeable. That's possible.
So there's a novelty here that you can't even do this in Yerushalayim.
Correct.
So one might have thought, well, I can buy a house in Yerushalayim, and the previous owner would have a lot of money they can spend in food in Yerushalayim.
Right. No, certainly the case, but obviously it's not very plausible if you read the psukim, right? The point is to eat in Yerushalayim, not to rent a hotel room.
Right. Oh, yeah. But you might have thought that the other guy could have.
Right. Says the Gemara, 1 second. So that's a great explanation for why the woman is married with Moed Maser Sheni. But if you give Maser Sheni for Behemat Me'ah or for Karka, it doesn't happen. And basically you have to redeem the money. But the question asked the Gemara is, when you bought an animal, according to Rabbi Yehuda, not to bring as a korban, you just said we cancel the sale. You go back to the guy and you say, give me back my money, here's your animal. This was not permitted. Why don't you say the same thing about the field? I bought a field with Moed Maser Sheni. Why don't I go back to the person who bought the field, who I sold the field to me, and say, it was all wrong. You were not allowed to sell me this field because you knew it was Mesa, remember. You knew it was Moed Maser Sheni. Why did you sell it to me? You're guilty too. I want to reverse the sale. So Amar Mar, in Lakach Yochal Kenegdan, if you buy a field or buy a Behemat Me'ah, you have to redeem and eat the same amount of money. Amai Yachzru Damav L'Mekomam. Why don't you cancel the sale? Kihatam, like we did by the case of Behemat Tehora. Amar Shmuel, well, that is of course what you would do. But the Mishnah is talking about a case, Kishabarach, right? This guy sold you the house and they were like, oh my God, I know he's going to come back tomorrow. And you fled town, right? He ran away. Says the Gemara, so clearly it's Taimad de Barach. The only reason you don't reverse the sale is because the guy ran away. Hello, Barach. If he didn't flee, then you would go back to him and say, I know you sold me a house for $10,000 yesterday, and you thought you made the deal of the century. But guess what? It was money of Maser Sheni, which I told you. And the rabbi said I have to undo the sale, right? So it turns out that the seller is losing, right? Because he thought he sold it, he lost his opportunity, whatever it might be. Why are we finding the seller? Why don't we find the buyer who's the one who actually used the money of Maser Sheni? Says the Gemara on the top line of Nun Vav Amabet, Hello Barach, Kansinan the Mocher. Why are we're finding the seller, Niknasei Lilokeach? Why don't we find the person who used the money of Maser Sheni to buy the field, the buyer, and say, you tough luck. You're not supposed to use your money to buy a field. You did something wrong. You got to redeem $10,000 separately. Answers the Gemara, a very important, famous, I'll say liberal argument. Lav achbara gana. It's not the mouse that steals. Ela chora gana. It's the hole that steals. It takes two to steal. If the mouse might be guilty of stealing the cheese, but if there was no hole in the house, in the wall, the mouse couldn't get in. And so essentially, the person who took his Maser Sheni and bought a field is doing something wrong. But you can't use your Maser Sheni to buy a field unless there's a second party. And the second party, the one who trafficked in Maser Sheni, is also guilty. Now, ask the Gemara, what do you mean? Is he? What about the one who stole? Right? If there's no mouse, what's the hole going to do? Says Gemara, you're right. It means both are guilty, of course, right? But why are we punishing the one who sold the field? Because Mistavra Kolhecha Deika Isura Hatam Kansinan. Where the usher thing is, that's where you reverse it. So since the money of Maser Sheni went to the seller is considered to be an accomplice, right, to your act of perfidy, of using Maser Sheni inappropriately. The same way that it's not a mouse alone, it's the environment that the mouse was put in. Or we'll call it, I'm joking, right? But we'll call it the mouse hole, as the Gemara does, is also guilty. And so essentially, it's not like we hold both guilty, but because the money was given over, the Maser Sheni was given over, they're guilty. And of course, you can imagine, remember, this guy is doing it b'mesid. So he's walking around town saying, I got $10,000 of stolen money, I want to use it, right? The first person who took it from him is also an accomplice to, what do they call it? Like trafficking in stolen goods, right? There's definitely a legal term for it. So yes, they're both guilty. Okay, so that's the end of that discussion. Continues the next Mishnah on top of Daf Nun Vav Amud Bet. What about the next case? Hamikadesh be'orla. A man goes to a woman, he gives her a beautiful apple. It turns out, well, let's say an apple, but it turns out to be arla. Arla is fruit of the first 3 years, right? You're not allowed to eat fruit from a tree for the first 3 years. Or klaya karen, right? You give them kilayim. You took grapes and you mix them with olives and you grew them in your vineyard, that's kilayim, right? So you gave a woman a bunch of grapes, right? Or shar niskal, or you have an animal that killed another person, right? The halacha is if your animal kills another person or it's a muad and it kills other shar, you have to kill that shar.
Yeah.
But before you kill it, or maybe even after you kill it, you take the meat and you hand it over to your dear beloved and say, will you marry me? Okay? Or egla rufa, where you find, after they kill the egla rufa in the nachal, you go and you pick up the pieces and you go and give it to a woman to marry her. Or tzipore mitzorah, you take the birds remember the mitzorah sends away the birds, you set up a net, you catch the birds and you go and give them away. Okay?
That's devious.
Or se'ar nazir, the nazir cuts off their hair, but it's gorgeous hair. You go and make it into a wig and you hand it over to someone and say, I want to sell it to you. Or peter chamor, right? We're getting really creative here. Or peter chamor, remember you exchange the chamor for the sef for a chamor. Or basar b'chalav, where you go give her a meat and milk sandwich. Or chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. You take something you brought your regular animal to the azara and you shechted it. All of these things are things that are asur b'hana'ah. They're not just asur to eat, they're asur b'hana'ah, and therefore giving them to a person is not giving a person any value. And so eina mikudeshet, she is not married because there is no value. Not only can she not eat these things, she can't sell them, she can't burn them, she gets nothing out of it, they're not worth a pruta, she's not married to you. How continues the Mishnah? Remember, by hektish has no value to you either. But if you give hektish to somebody else, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it's b'shogeg, and Rabbi Meir, if it's b'mezid, then that hektish, you did a sin, right? But the kedusha goes off the hektish, it's mi'ila, right? And then you could marry her with it. But by all of these, continues the Mishnah, machran, if you sell them, right? So you go to the store and you say, maybe you don't tell them where these birds came from. And you sell the birds for $50 and you gave $50 to her, then kidesh b'demeyam mikudeshet, then she is married. Because the Isser Hana'ah is not to efface, it does not stay on the money. So the money is not the same as the thing you exchanged it for. And so therefore, if you use that money, she's married. You might not be the right person for her, I would say, but nonetheless, she is married. Okay? Now the Gemara is going to go through how we know that all of these prohibitions are Isurei Hana'ah. And that's going to take us a couple days, right? Because it's many different cases. So we're not going to do them all today, Rosa. No. Arla. How do we know that Arla, which the Torah says, right, don't eat food that's Arla? How do you know it's Asur Bahana? Minalim. Tanya Arelim lo yocha. Says things that are Arel don't eat. That's only eating. Ein liela Isur Achila Hana Minayin Shlo Yehena Mimenu. How do we know you can't take the fruit that's Arla and benefit from it? Shlo Yitzba Mimenu. You can't use it to dye. Remember, they obviously use nuts. Gall nuts and other nuts as dye very frequently. So you're not even using you're using the klipa, the shell basically for dye. Lo yidlok bo aner, you can't use it as fuel, right? You just can't use it. Tamalomar arlatem arlato. It's the plural. And that tells you the Rabbatet Kulam that you can't do anything with it. Not only can you not eat it, you can't get any hana'ah from it. And you can't marry a woman with it. The next case was klaya karam, which is kilayim. What do you have to say kilayim in English? Mixtures? It's a hard word in English, right? It's like interbreeded. Okay, something like that. Kilayim. Minalan, how do we know that? On Mechizkiah, because the pasuk very interesting says, don't plant things together. Pen tikdash. Maybe they'll usually say kodesh tikdash means holy. Here it doesn't mean holy, it means prohibited, right? Because that's what holy means also. Tikdash means it's prohibited to you. But we darshan this unusual word as pen tukad ish. Tikdash means lit on fire. So meaning maybe it'll be something that you have to burn, meaning you have to destroy it. Now you can't burn it for fuel, but you have to destroy it because tukad ish means it's prohibited in hana'ah. Okay? Amar Rashi, Rashi Amar, pen yekodesh. Maybe it'll become something like kadshin, right? And that's what we're saying. If you plant kilayim, the fruit is off limits to you like hektish. Well, hektish, remember, is not totally off limits to you because if you spend hektish, the money goes off of hektish, and you can actually marry someone with it. So maybe the same thing is true about kalayim. Ima kodesh tofeset damav. The kedusha switches onto the money. The yotzel lechulin, and the object itself goes out lechulin. Maybe the same thing is true about kalayim. If you sell kalayim for $100, maybe the $100 becomes kalayim, and the fruit is mutar. Af kalayim kerem tofeset damav yotzel lechulin. Ella, you're right. Forget about that explanation. Machverta kedechizkiah. The first explanation was better of Chizkiah, that the words pen tekdash means tukad ba'esh, right? That tukad esh, that it will become, fuel based or burning. It'll be burnt. Okay, the third case, which is the last one we're going to get to today, is the case of shar haniskal. So remember, the case of shar haniskal is an animal that kills a human being, right? You have to shar yisakel, right? But so I'm sorry, if the animal's a muad, it says gam balav yumat, right? But if the animal's not a muad, it says shar yisakel the bal hashar naki, right? Well, it says more than that. Let me actually read the pasuk. You ready? I'm reading now from mine. This is Shmot Chaf Aleph Chaf Chet. Ki yigach shar et ish o et isha. A shark gores a man or a woman, umet, and that person dies. Sakol yisakel ashar. You stone the shar, velo ye'achel et bisaro. You can't eat its meat. Ubal hashar naki. And the owner of the shar is free. Now, none of the first part makes sense. The second two parts, right? There's three parts here. It says sakol yisakel ashar, kill it by stoning. Lo ye'achel et bisaro. Don't eat its meat, which is pretty obvious because if it's a nevela, you shouldn't be able to eat its meat. And balashar naki, what does that mean? Balashar is free from what? Okay, so we're gonna have a bava kama drasha today, and then you'll be prepared when we get to it in bava kama. It's coming up. It's Titania. Says the Braita. So this is the Braita that we're about to engage in, and this is a mechilta. It says here in Mishpatim, because that's where obviously Mishpatim is. That's where this pasuk is, and it's Gemara and Bava Kama. The first part of that pasuk is you stone the shar. Now, once you stone a shar, it's not edible because it's a nevela, right? It was not shechted properly. It was killed by stoning. So any adea shenevelahi, I know that it's a nevela. Nevela asura b'achilav. Obviously, you can't eat it because it's a nevela. So why does the Torah continue and say matam lo yochal b'sara? Why does it continue and say don't eat it? Magid, what the Torah is telling you is that let's say your shar kills a person, and you know that tomorrow they're going to stone the shar, and you get smart and you shecht it the night before, right? And you say, "Oh, I'm going to eat it. I don't want it to go to waste." You can't, because once it's a shar niskal, you can't eat it even if you shecht it. Meaning once it's officially by Beit Din a shar niskal. Shem shachato la'achar shenigmar dino. If you shecht the shar after the court has concluded that it's a shar niskal, asur ba'achila, it's still prohibited to eat, even though it was shechted properly. Okay, and I'm sure the court will be very angry with you, but nonetheless, you can't even eat it. How do you know it's asur b'hana'a minayin? This is the same Braita in the Mechilta. How do you know it's asur b'hana'a minayin? Tamalomra, the third part of the pasuk, the third clause is ubal hashar naki. The owner of the shar is free, or naki means clean. It says, how does that mean? It's asur b'hana'a, my mashma. Shimon ben Zoma, which is an unusual Tana, but one we see in the Bechilta. Shimon ben Zoma Omer, Ka'adam shomer lechavero, yatsa ploni naki min chasav. This guy was cleaned out, is the way we would say it, right? He gets nothing. So the Baal Hashar gets no benefit from the shar. He can't even use the carcass of the shar or to feed his animals or to make wool or not wool, to make a leather, right? So that the shar is killed, which means step one. Even if you shecht it before it's killed, you can't eat it. That's lo ye'achel et bisaro. And furthermore, you get nothing from the shar, meaning it's asur b'hana'ah. You feed it to your animals, and you can't give it to a woman to get married. Okay, just so you know, that is the Braita in the Mechilta. Now, says the Gemara, I got a little problem about that. Sorry, did I read all these words? Ein lo behem hana'ah shel klum. You don't get any benefit from it. Now, ask the Gemara, one sec. I have a whole nother way to read this pasuk, which would tell you a different halacha. Mimai, how do you know the hai lo yochal b'saro is referring to the third case? I'm not going to do them again because it gets very confusing here, for me at least. The Torah says, stone the shar. If you shechted it before you stoned it, lo yochal b'saro, don't eat the meat. And balashar naki, the owner of the shar, gets no benefit from that dead carcass, from the meat or from the skin. Okay, maybe I have a whole nother way to read the pasuk. Maybe the way you should read it is how do you know? At the middle clause, lo yochal b'saro is referring to that's referring to when you shechted it properly after you concluded that it's a shar niskal. Dilma, maybe that's wrong. Maybe shari. Maybe, in fact, again, the court would punish you, they'd be very angry with you. But maybe if you actually preempted the courts and you took your condemned shar home and shechted it properly, you can eat it. So what's the Torah telling you don't eat it? Hai lo yochal is saying after you slaughtered it, after you stoned it. Hecha the salke miskal udata. It's telling you after you stoned it. Maybe it's telling me that no, of course, after you stone it, you don't need a pasuk to tell me you can't eat it because it's an nevela. But maybe when it says don't eat it, what it means is don't get hana'ah from it. Because Rabbi Vo, Amar Rabbi Lazar explained, Amar Rabbi Vo, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Kol makom shenemar lo yochalu tochalu tochlu. Whenever the Torah says don't eat something, it doesn't mean don't eat it. It means don't eat it and don't get benefit from it. Echad isur achila, ve'echad isur hana'ah mashma. How do I know that? I know that from nevela. Because what does the Torah say by nevela? The very, very strange pasuk. It says, I wish I had it here. Here, I do. Lo tochlu kol nevela. Don't eat nevela. Legera asher b'sharecha titnenu. Give it to your non-Jewish friend. I don't understand. It says don't eat it. Why can't I give it to my friend? Right? Why would I have thought I can't give it to my neighbor just because I can't eat it? Right? It must be that when the Torah says don't eat it, it means don't eat it and don't get benefit from it automatically. And therefore we have to explain, oh, by nevela, you can give it to your friend or you can feed it to your animals, right? That's the other.
You can even sell it to a non-Jew.
You can sell it to a non-Jew, right? So, or you can give it away. We talked all about this, right? Who do you give it to? Who do you sell it to, etc. But so it says, but therefore, ad sheyifrat lecha katuv, until the pasuk specifies, I mean only eating or only not eating, kiderach sheparat lecha b'nevela, like you specified by nevela. But nevela becomes the principle that when the Torah says don't eat, it automatically means don't eat and don't benefit, except by nevela, where it specifically says don't eat it. You can sell it to a non-Jew. You can give it to your friend, right? You can, it's nena legoy or mechar lenachri, etc.
You can?
You can by nevela.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not here.
But not by Shar Niskal, correct?
Right.
But
Okay. So what?
So
Yeah. So what do we do with
nevela,
it? Do we like burn it, or what do we do with it?
By the Shar Niskal?
Yeah.
I guess so. You probably just bury it. I don't actually know. You maybe burn it, maybe bury it, or leave it there to rot, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. By nevela, just obviously, as everyone knows, right? All the slaughterhouses sell their non-kosher, anything that's a nevela, they sell treifa. It's probably how they make a lot of their money, right? So, but
Right.
yeah, but that's a pasuk. So therefore, it says where maybe what the Torah is coming to tell you is, but maybe you're allowed to eat the shar niskal if you shecht it, right? But the Torah says, shar yisakel, I got the wrong pasuk. Sakol yisakel, right? Lo tochlo et basar. What's the exact word? Sorry. Lo ye'achel et basaro is saying don't eat it, because of course I know you don't eat it. It's saying don't get hana'ah from it, as the principle of Rabbi Elazar or Bivom Rabbi Elazar. Says, well, it doesn't make any sense. Look, if the Torah says don't eat it, and it tells you not to eat it, it can also tell you not to get hana'ah. But if you already knew you can't eat it because it's a nevela, then the words don't eat it don't mean don't get hana'ah, because the Torah could have just said don't get hana'ah, right? So it says the Gemara, where am I? Hanimili, the only time that it's true that the words don't eat mean don't eat and don't get benefit is Hecha de Nafkal and Isra Achila, where we know from the words don't eat that there's an Isra Achila, right? Milo Yochal. That's where you can also say it means an Isra Hana'ah. But Hacha, by Shar Haniskal, Isra Achila, we know already because it's a treifa, it's a nevela, right? Misakol Yisakel Nafka, right? And Isa Gedaitach, you only wanted to use the word lo tochal for Isra Hana'ah, who dichtiv, then just say nichnu kra lo yeheneh, and just say don't get Hana'ah, right? Inami, or another problem with that is, what about the words bisaro, right? Lo yochal, it could have just said the words don't eat it, which means don't eat it or don't get Hana'ah. Why does et bisaro lamali? What is the words et bisaro, right? It's a whole nother leva now. Why it said lo yochal, the meat? What else would you be eating, right? The eyes, right? So obviously you're not eating the meat. Ella must be telling me, afal gav, shachte ke'ein basar asur. Even if you shechted it like you would a normal animal, meaning, presumably, you shechted it the night before, tomorrow they're going to stone it, you preempted that and shechted it, Even so, since it's a shar haniskal, it's asur to eat and it's asur for hana. Okay, so that is the Braita, and that's our source of this whole question. Says Rar Zutra, I have 1 second. You're being a little bit loose with this because maybe you can stone the animal and shecht it at the same time. Get a really sharp stone that's essentially a knife, and you could very carefully go and shecht it in the process of stoning it. Right? Says the Gemara, maybe all the Torah is telling me, Hani Mili, when is it asur to eat the shar niskal? Is heicha, let's say you were badak tzur, you checked a rock. Remember, you have to do badika on your knife before you shecht with it. So you checked to make sure it was very sharp, there were no nicks in it, right? And shachatba demichsi kaskila, that's like stoning it because you're using a rock around the neck. And therefore, avol shchita b'sakin, lo, what if you did the proper shchita with a knife? Maybe the Torah is only telling you, this is a weird thing to tell you, that you can't shecht an animal with a rock, right? That's the whole point here. Says Gemara, that's ridiculous, because the Torah doesn't ever tell you how to shecht an animal, right? Midi sakin be'al, right? Doesn't ever say to use a knife in the Torah. And further, we have a straight out Braita in Chulin, Lo Tanya, Bikol Shochtim, right? It's the beginning of Chulin. You can shecht an animal with anything, whether if it's sharp enough. Bein b'tzor, it could be a rock. Bein b'tzchukit, it could be an edge of glass. Bein b'krumit shel kana, it could even be a reed if it was sharp enough to actually make the cut. It doesn't have to be a knife, right? So therefore,
obsidian knives were used by the Aztecs to slaughter the human sacrifices.
Well, you can use it to shecht an animal, it sounds like too. So therefore, it's not clearly can't mean that. Now says the Gemara, okay, but the truth is, if you've been following along at home, we actually have something extra in the pasuk, right? Because earlier we said that the words Bal Hashar Naki come to tell you that the Naki Minechasav, that he can't get Hana'ah. But we just said that the word Lo Yochal tells you, at Bisaro, tells you that you can't get Hana'ah, right? So it says the Gemara, V'hashta, the Nafkilan Yisra Chila, Yisra Hana'ah Tirvaya Milo Yochal, since we now have learned out that you can't eat it, even the night before, right? And you can't get Hana'ah from it, from the word Lo Yochal, Hai Balashar Naki Lamayata. So why do you need to say at the end of the pasuk Balashar Naki, which earlier we said means he's Naki Minechasav, he gets cleaned out, right? But now we know that already. Says the word no, because all we would have thought is that you can't get Hana'ah from feeding the meat to your animal, let's say, right? Or using the meat for any other purpose. But how do you know that you can't even use the skin? Right? The skin is not really part of the animal. It's not the essential part. So Lahana'at Oro. We need the pasuk to tell you that you can't even use the hide for leather or for parchment or anything else. Because I would have thought it says lo yochal et bisaroktiv, right? It only says the meat, and bisaro asur va'oro mutar, and therefore you need an extra pasuk to tell you lo yochal abal ashar naki, that the bal ashar gets nothing, and that means even use of the skin. So the bal ashar cannot even use the skin. And that's why so again, now going back to the beginning, the Torah says, Sakol yisakel, right? You stone the animal, so it's a nevela, you can't eat it. But then it says, don't eat it, to telling you, even if you shecht it properly the night before, you can't eat it. But that tells you two things. It tells you can't eat it, and you can't get hana'ah from it, because that's what lo yochal always means. But I might have thought lo yochal bisaro, you only can't eat or get hana'ah from the meat. How do I know you also can't get hana'ah, because you don't eat the skin? Therefore, it says Bal Hashar Naki. It says where that's a beautiful, great explanation. We're all ready for Bava Kama. But there's another Tana in Bava Kama who says that the words Bal Hashar Naki mean something completely different. They mean that the Bal Hashar doesn't have to pay the things he normally would have to pay. If you have an animal that's a muad and you kill a person, remember you have to pay, not Daldar, you have to pay kofer, or you have to pay that because you killed a person. So maybe if it's an animal that's a tam, right, where you pay chatzi nezek, maybe you pay half the kofer. You don't. It's Bal Hashar Naki. And for example, if you have a human being who hits a woman who's pregnant and makes her miscarriage, the Torah talks about maybe fladot. You have to pay for her miscarriage. But if your shar does that, you don't, according to this Tana, if it's a tam, right? So Lahanach Tana, Demafkile Hai Bal Hashar Naki. According to the Tana in Bava Kama, who uses the words Bal Hashar Naki to teach you Chatzi Kofer, that you don't pay Chatzi Kofer, you don't pay Dmei Vladot. So now, how does that Tana know that you can't get benefit from the skin of this animal. Hana'at oro minalo. How do they know that you can't get hana from the skin? Because Torah said lo yochal et bisaro, which means only don't eat and don't get hana from the flesh. How do you know it also includes the skin? Because of the word et. It says lo yochal et bisaro. Could have said lo yochal bisaro. Et comes to add something. May et bisaro. Et hatafel bisaro. That which is added to the meat, and the word et is always extra. V'idach, and the other Tana would say, et lo darsh, right? The word et is just literary. It's the way the Torah speaks. V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha. We're about to discuss that. It doesn't mean something extra to Hashem. It means that's just the way the Torah is. As we very famously, we've had this brighter many times in Shas, the top line of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph. Keditanya, as we've had many times, Shimon HaAmsuni. Shimon, I don't know where Amsuni is, but it sounds like a cool place. But Shimon from Amsuni, or whatever that means, and some called him, say it was Nehemiah HaAmsuni, Hayadoresh Kol Itin Shebetorah. They would go page by page, and every time the Torah said et, at this, and the word et probably shows up many times, I don't know how many. In the Torah, they would say, what is the extra thing that we're being taught here? Kivan shegia le'et Hashem Elokecha tira. But finally, he got up to, this was in Parshat Ve'etchanan, so it was a long trip. So the pasuk, et Hashem Elokecha tira. Hashem, which we translate as Hashem, your God, you fear. But that could just say Hashem Elokecha tira. What is et? So who else are you going to fear besides God? So Shimon HaAmsuni had a crisis of faith, right? So he said, you know what? Clearly my rule is wrong. If this et does not mean to include anyone with God, then every other et that I've darshed in the whole Torah is done inappropriately. Piresh. So he stopped. He stopped and he said, I'm done. My life project is over. Amrulo Talmidav, his student said to him, Rebbe, Kol idin shadarashna mateleim. But what about you have 500 drushot in a book here. What about every one of these? Amar Lam, and he said, that's the way it is. Kashem shekibalti schara adrisha, the way I will be rewarded for trying. Kach kibalti ala prisha, I will get schar for giving them up. Because if it's not the right rule, it's not the right rule, and we'll start all over, and we'll learn the Torah differently. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva, until Rabbi Akiva came around, v'limed, and he said, no, you can also darshan this one. Because et Hashem Elokecha tira could be l'rabot talmidei chachamim. That in fact, there is, again, what I'm about to say is heretical, but maybe Rabbi Akiva said it, there is something that approximates God that you can include in the category of God, and that is the talmidei chachamim. And this, of course, is a very big innovation of Rabbi Akiva, according to some, and that the pasuk is telling you that it's not just God that one should fear, but it's even those who are scholars of Hashem, Talmidei Chachamim, that they should be feared as well. And we will stop there with that very provocative drasha.
Thank you.
Shavua Tov. I'm here next Shabbat. I don't know if you guys want to learn on Zoom or do it on Shabbat, but we can discuss that on the WhatsApp.
Great. Yasha Kawad.
You're muted, Miriam, I think. You're muted. We don't hear you.
I said, don't forget to write on the WhatsApp group where we got to for Dove for tomorrow.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, have a good night. Shavua Tov.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you for the sharing. My cats, thank you.